Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Does it ever seem like the media get weekly memos telling them how to word their news coverage? Well, if they do, this past weekend's theme was fear. On Saturday, hundreds of illegal immigrants were arrested in coordinated ICE raids across 6 states. Arresting illegal immigrants is the job of ICE, so you might think, well, no big deal. But the press apparently got the memo saying otherwise. Fear spreads across U.S. after immigration arrests, blared one CNN headline. Fear grips immigrant communities after ICE raids, cried the AP. Trump administration's deportation raids spark fear in immigrant communities, said Time magazine. What's this new fear epidemic? Where does it come from? David Leopold is an immigration attorney and a critic of President Trump's immigration policies. He joins us tonight from Cleveland. David, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Tucker.
So we read today that the government of Mexico is spending tens of millions of dollars to fight these executive orders, and that they're mobilizing U.S. consulates across the United States to help people in the United States illegally remain here. Why do you think the government of Mexico is doing that?
Well, I can't speak for the government of Mexico, but I can speak for the people of, that I deal with. And I think what, in your open, you mentioned fear. And I think it's Donald Trump. I think it's Steve Miller. I think it's Steve Bannon who are the ones who are perpetuating fear. And I think it's an overt attempt to create chaos. We need a president, Tucker, that is going to bring stability. We need a president who's going to give us confidence. We need a president who's going to respect the rule of law. And we've got a president who in the first 3 weeks of his term has got Ninth Circuit ruling against him because he's violated the Constitution. He's got a battery of lawsuits out of New York. He's got people trapped in airports, which, a court took care of. This is not America. This is not what we are. We can do better.
Okay, so I want to get back to something you said that I absolutely agree with, which is that chaos is a bad thing and it degrades our society. And it's kind of hard to come back from chaos. So the government of Mexico, and this bears directly on what you do, so please don't take a pass on this question. Jorge Castaneda, who's the former foreign minister of Mexico under Vicente Fox, big deal there, Princeton graduate, by the way, has said that the new strategy among rich people in Mexico is to fund lawsuits that will tie up our judicial system. There's a massive backlog of immigration cases, as you know. He said he'd like to increase his backlog, 5x, and bring our system to a halt until the president relents. That is a strategy based on creating more chaos, is it not?
Well, look, again, I'm not a Mexican official, and if you want to talk to them, I suggest you bring them on the show. But what I can tell you is that hang on, you asked a question. Let me answer, Tucker.
Please do.
You mentioned the immigration court's backlog, and they are backlogged, 500,000 cases. Why is that? That's because the Republicans refused in 2013 to pass an immigration reform bill in the House of Representatives, even though the votes were there. We could have reformed the immigration system, and you and I would be having a conversation tonight about an orderly country, about a place where people are not in panic.
It's a little, come on, David. I mean, I was here for that whole argument, and I don't think that the so-called immigration reform that you're referring to, there's good and bad in it, but it wouldn't have fixed everything, and that's an overstatement, and you know it. But what I'm so struck by is the fact that you're unwilling to even comment on what the Mexican government is doing, and I wonder if you extended that same courtesy to the Russian government. I'm sure you were in a tizzy like everybody on the left 2 months ago with the idea that the Russians were trying to foul with our system. They're trying to influence the outcome of our systems. Here you have the Mexican government on our southern border saying we're going to shut down the judiciary in your country unless you do what we want, and you've got no comment on that?
Well, look, our judiciary, our Article I courts speak for themselves. They're the same courts that ruled against Donald Trump, the independent judges. And if you want to talk about the judiciary, let's ask the president, because he is trying to delegitimize the judiciary in this country.
Work with me here. Let's have a rational back and forth where we can talk about the same thing. I know that you don't like Trump and you're mad about a bunch of different things, and some are legitimate and some aren't.
I'm not mad.
You disapprove. But we're talking about immigration policy, and I'm just asking you to comment on something in the news today about the Russian government trying to influence our immigration policy in the same way that you would like to, and I'm wondering, why do you think they're doing that, and is it legitimate?
Well, I don't know what the Russian government's up to. What I do know is that,
the Mexican government.
Oh, I'm sorry. The Mexican government. Again, I don't know what they're up to. Look, I think we as Americans ought to be running our own courts, ought to be running our own immigration policy. I don't think other governments, whether it's Mexico, whether it's Russia, whether it's Israel, whether it's France, ought to be involved in our judicial system. What I do want to see, though, Tucker, and this is why, you said I was angry, what I'm concerned about is that we've got a new president. And what this president has done, together with people like Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller, who, by the way, was on television yesterday.
This is just silly. I mean, this is just silly. I doubt you know anything about what those guys do for a living. I'm not here to defend them, but I mean, let's just get back to the core issue here. And I'm serious. Like, why do you think that we have 11, 12, 13, we don't know the full number, but million people living in this country illegally? Maybe since you do this for a living, you've thought about it a little bit. And maybe it's connected to the fact that rich people in Mexico want them to stay here because they don't want to pay for the social safety net that we have. They want the American middle class to pay for it.
Well, I don't think that's quite fair.
Oh, it's not quite fair? Really? No. Because they pay less in taxes, the rich in Mexico, than any OECD country there is.
I'm not talking about
the... be asking for reforms in Mexico, no?
I'm talking about the people here. We're talking about 11 million people, most of whom have been here for many years, most of whom have long ties to the United States, have U.S. citizen children, pay their taxes, mind you, if through ITN, International Tax ID numbers. Who do you think is supporting our Social Security system? Look, the immigrants in this country came to this country like my grandfather did when he fled the Holocaust. They came here for a better life. They came here for in many cases, for shelter. What we have now is a president who wants to turn he wants to throw out refugees who are coming in need of shelter. He wants to throw out immigrants who are coming here to bring the best and the brightest. You know, what did we see last week? We saw doctors who were thrown out of the country. Come on, Tucker.
David,
facts are important too.
Look, you're getting into the talking points which I hear every day and are boring. I want to get to the principles here. And here's the principle you just elucidated. You said these people came here to work in search for a better life. And I don't doubt that. I know some of them, and I think you're right. But there are a lot of people who would like to move to other countries for a better life, and I'm wondering if all of them have the absolute right to do that. So just to give you one among many examples, there are a ton of poor people in the city of Detroit. It's right on the Canadian border, right across from Windsor, Ontario. Do they have the right to move illegally to Canada and go on Canadian welfare programs and take Canadian jobs? And should the U.S. government be encouraging that?
Well, of course not, and that's why...
Well, what do you mean, of course not?
You asked me to answer your question, so let me try that.
I'm just surprised.
Let me try it. Tucker, let me try to answer your question.
Please.
Of course people shouldn't be moving into countries illegally. I don't think anybody, promotes that. What I'm here to talk about
what are you saying? You're saying that people here illegal have a right to stay. That's what you just said. You've been saying it for 7.5 minutes.
Okay.
So, but they don't have a right to go to Canada to do that. Only a right to come here. Like, what's the consistent theme here? Just so those following along at home can know.
Tucker, the consistent theme is that we need to fix an outdated immigration system. You know that as well as I know that.
That doesn't mean anything. Like, you're saying that people have a right here to stay here, even though they're here illegally, but they don't have a right to move to any other country illegally. Why the double standard? Simple question.
Well, what I'm saying is that people who have contributed to this country, people who have followed the rules, people who have children that have grown up in this country, people who have paid their taxes, people who will learn English, people who will be vetted through security screenings, people who, when we bring out of the shadows, we want to know who's here. That will make us safer.
Okay, so what about people who haven't followed the rules? So the president says we want to deport people who've committed felonies, and he's tried to do that, and people like you have gotten completely hysterical about it. Should he be allowed to deport people, as the previous president did, who committed felonies? Like, I mean, yes or no?
See, that's the thing. Nobody is arguing about whether or not we should deport felons or national security risks, Tucker. That's the whole point. Under the Obama immigration enforcement priorities, felons and national security risks and recent border crossers were #1 for deportation. So if Donald Trump or if General Kelly really wanted to keep these enforcement priorities in place, why did they have to replace them?
But that's what they've been doing. Did you notice that the ICE roundups the last week were almost exclusively of people with criminal records? This is the thing that we should fear? I mean, are you following the news at all?
Hang on, let me push back against that. I know what ICE is saying, and I know what Secretary Kelly said today. But what we don't have with any of those reports is transparency. They aren't telling us exactly who. We've had members of Congress, Joaquin Castro from Texas, members of the Hispanic Caucus. What we want is some transparency here.
Well, I'm a little bit disappointed in the arguments that you've marshaled, but I hope you'll come back.
I'll be back anytime, Tucker.
Great. Thanks, David. I appreciate it. White House suggested today that President Trump could potentially fire National Security Advisor Michael Flynn over his wiretap conversation with the Russian ambassador to the United States. There's a lot going on in Washington, and for all of it, we go now to Fox News correspondent Trace Gallagher. Trace?
Tucker, National Security Advisor Michael Flynn either has the full confidence of President Trump or he doesn't, depending on who you ask. And we learned tonight the DOJ warned the White House that Flynn might have been swayed by Russia. We know the White House has been reviewing Flynn's contact with the Russians and whether he discussed the possibility of the U.S. lifting sanctions once Trump took office. If true, that could be a violation of the Logan Act, which bans private citizens from engaging in foreign policy. Initially, Michael Flynn denied talking about sanctions, and Vice President Mike Pence publicly defended him. Now Flynn has left open the possibility that sanctions were discussed and has apologized to the vice president. And today the White House gave different takes on Flynn's current status. Listen.
Yes, General Flynn does enjoy the full confidence of the president.
The president is evaluating the situation. He's speaking to Vice President Pence relative to the conversation the vice president had with General Flynn, and also speaking to various other people about what he considers the single most important subject there is, our national security.
Also interesting that the president did not use the opportunity of a joint news conference with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to show support for Michael Flynn. Not a single Flynn question was asked during the newser, and questions that were shouted to the president on the way out were ignored. Though Trump and the Canadian Prime Minister struck a cordial note. No secret the two have vast differences on trade, climate change, immigration, and refugees. Questions concerning those hot topics were skirted by both leaders, with the PM saying he's not here to lecture another country. And breaking tonight, District Court Judge James Robart, who initially blocked President Trump's temporary travel ban, has taken another shot at the administration, saying the case is moving forward. Now, that's exactly what the Department of Justice did not want to happen. Today, the DOJ asked Judge Robart to delay proceedings in his court until the full Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals decides whether to rehear the case. Both the administration and the states of Washington and Minnesota have to respond to the Ninth Circuit by Thursday. But Judge Robart said, quoting, "I am not prepared to slow this down while the Ninth Circuit considers further appeals." So it appears the administration can either fight this in district court, make an emergency appeal to the Supreme Court, or rewrite the executive order to make it easier to uphold in court. As of today, all of those options are still on the table. And separately, moments ago, a federal judge in Virginia has now issued a preliminary injunction against the travel ban, which puts the executive order further into limbo. Finally, Steven Mnuchin was confirmed by the Senate as the Treasury Secretary. The vote was largely along party lines, 53-47. West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin was the only Democrat to vote in favor. The 54-year-old Mnuchin, who was sworn in moments ago by Vice President Mike Pence. Watch.
It is my great honor tonight to present to the American people our new Treasury Secretary of the United States, Steven Mnuchin. Steven, I want to congratulate you. A lot of people wanted that position, Steven. A lot of people. A lot of very successful people.
And Mnuchin will hit the ground running, considering the president has said that he will be in charge of overhauling the tax code and renegotiating trade deals. Tucker.
Trace Gallagher, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks, Trace. Up next, a gay journalist in New York City has come out of the closet as a conservative. He'll talk to us about how his former friends drove him right over the edge and into conservatism. Well, a gay journalist in Brooklyn has done just about the bravest thing a gay Brooklyn journalist can do. He abandoned trendy lifestyle liberalism for something else. Chadwick Moore wrote a pretty straightforward profile of Milo Yiannopoulos for a left-wing gay magazine last fall. The simple profile cost him many of his friends and triggered a big wave of online hostility. The backlash, Moore said in a piece for the New York Post, caused him to reevaluate his beliefs, and he decided that modern liberalism is, quote, ugly, lockstep, incurious, and mean-spirited. He says he's conservative now, though he did vote for Hillary Clinton a mere 3 months ago, so he's still rethinking things. Chadwick Moore joins us from New York. Chadwick, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you. As you can see, I left my scarlet letter at home.
You did, well, but it sounds like you got one. You have this really interesting piece in the New York Post, and the part that jumped out at me immediately was the fact that after doing this profile, which you described as pretty straightforward, you know, sort of not for Milo or against, but kind of telling who he is, that one of your best friends disowned you as a friend.
Right. I mean, and this is a story that is just repeated constantly, right? Everyone lost friends and family member. And I was even, when I even said I voted for Hillary Clinton, so many people were like, oh, you did? Oh, I just assumed you were a Trump supporter. And why would you assume that? And the profile was extremely balanced. And I treated him no differently than I would have treated anyone else. But people aren't accustomed to hearing those sorts of stories about controversial figures, well, quote unquote controversial figures, people on the far right.
So you found yourself looking at the community you live in through a very different lens all of a sudden, you wrote. And what did you see?
Paranoia and mean-spiritedness and an aversion to understanding, an aversion to communicating with people who don't agree with you, and to understanding why exactly Trump became so popular and eventually won. And also, now that the election is over, sort of evaluating how the Democratic Party and how the far left alienated so many people and how they messed up so badly. You know, I thought that after the election they would have sat down and had a come to Jesus moment, and that hasn't happened at all.
Interesting. So you wrote this piece before the election, right?
Yes, yeah, about a month before.
So the reaction is so interesting to me because the world that you live in, it was ascendant. I mean, every rights battle that's been fought over the past 10 years, a victory. It looked like Hillary Clinton was going to be elected. Why the closed-mindedness and the paranoia you described? It seems like people with those views would be really happy.
That's a very good question. I don't know if it's just a nature of people aren't taught to think critically these days. People are so locked into their social media bubbles and their friendship bubbles, and it's just this reinforcing disease of hearing your own opinion spouted back at you constantly, and just uncontrollable paranoia. It's really sad, and it's really damaging to journalism, for one. Journalists are terrified of these people. Right. And it's just very, very sad and upsetting. And, more people, but I don't think it's the majority of people, and I don't think it's the majority of people on the left.
No, I don't think it is either, actually, not the people I know. But one of the saddest casualties, along with, decency and open-mindedness, is curiosity. When you sort of get in a place like that, it's very hard to be interested in people who disagree with you. And for journalists, I mean, that's just death, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And it's death for gay people. I've always said that gay people are natural libertarians, because we existed so many times, or for so long throughout history, outside of acceptable society, that, the one thing that we've always wanted was to be left alone by the government and by our neighbors, essentially. And now the left's become completely puritanical, and it's very off-putting.
Interesting. What an interesting journey you're on, Chadwick. Thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you very much.
I hope you keep writing about this.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Well, most of you were appalled when rioters halted a speech by Milo Yiannopoulos at UC Berkeley a couple weeks ago. Up next, we'll talk to an activist who helped organize those riots and thinks those tactics should be copied everywhere, often. Stay tuned for that. Well, it's been 2 weeks since rioters at UC Berkeley used violence to force the cancellation of a speech by Milo Yiannopoulos. Most people were appalled by what happened, but Yvette Filarca is not among those people. Besides working as a public school teacher in California, she is the national organizer for the Coalition to Defend Affirmative Action, Integration, and Immigrant Rights, and Fight for Equality by Any Means Necessary. BAM is the acronym. Filarca is willing to integrate violence into her political agenda, as you can see from this clip of her disrupting a rally last summer in Sacramento.
Off our street! Get the off our street! Are these people going to get off our street? We don't have to give a speech. You need to go, boy. Hey, say the shit. Be nice. Come here now. Off our street! Get the off our street! You, sir. Please. I'm just here to protest. Please. Stand down. Get out. Get back.
Filarca helped organize the Berkeley protests, and she says activists ought to copy his tactics for other speakers and events around the country. Yvette Filarca is with us now. Yvette, thanks a lot for joining us. So you did a bunch of interviews after, and you were asked about this, and you were, to your credit, I think, very straightforward about it and unapologetic, and you said, yeah, this guy was a fascist, Milo's a fascist, and we shut him down. You didn't pretend otherwise. We shut him down, and that's what you do with fascists. I think I'm characterizing what you said correctly. Just so we can understand the standard here, what is a fascist?
So a fascist is someone who's organizing a mass movement that's attacking women, immigrants, black people, other minority groups in a movement of genocide. That's what a fascist is.
Okay. So it's someone who's committing violence?
And it's someone who's committing violence and who's trying to organize other people to commit violence.
Okay.
And Milo Yiannopoulos is a fascist.
Okay. So he's committed acts of violence against the protected groups you mentioned?
Well, what he's doing is he's trying to be the youth face and the token that other people who are organizing violence try to hide behind. And so in all of his talks all over the country, what Yiannopoulos has done is whip up a whole lynch mob mentality where people who come to see him or his supporters not only agree with his views, but also attack other people. And that was certainly true in Washington State when one of his supporters came and actually shot an anti-fascist protester. But in Berkeley, we made sure that didn't happen because we were able to shut him down.
So, but you're conceding that Milo himself has not committed acts of violence, and nor has he incited violence by the legal definition. He'd be in jail if he did. But you're saying that because people who agree with him have committed violence, he should not be allowed to speak.
You know, fascist movement takes many forms, and it always tries to have one form that looks respectable and a little bit milder. But Yiannopoulos isn't just a stand-up comedian, and he isn't someone who just has ideas and posts them up on YouTube. He's someone who is funded by Breitbart and Steve Bannon to go around to college campuses to try to recruit other young people to then conduct those attacks on his behalf and on Trump's behalf. But I'm really, really glad to say that thousands of us were out there last week, or February 1st, and made sure that there were thousands of us to make sure that we defended our campus, this community, and especially the immigrant and Muslim students who were under attack and have been under attack by him and other fascists.
Right, and by using violence, I mean, you don't shy away from that by any means necessary is the name of your group, and so it implies violence. So what should we do with fascists? I mean, if you think that someone is espousing genocide, what should we do with them? I mean, should that person be allowed to walk free? Should we put him in jail? Should we kill him? Should we exile him? I mean, it's a sincere question. If you're willing to use violence because you think someone is espousing genocide, what's the penalty for that?
Well, first we've got to make sure we nip it in the bud, and we make sure that they're not allowed to recruit and act as if it's respectable to call for the mass murder of millions of people, in fact, millions who make up the majority of people in this nation at this point.
Okay,
and so they
just
can't
to be
hide
clear,
behind a
there's
platform
no
of free
Milo
speech.
Yiannopoulos, this is not a defense of him, just a factual point, has not ever said that, in public anyway, not that we have a record of. There's no evidence that he has called for the genocide of anybody, as you know, but you're saying by transference in some way, he inspires people who believe that, I guess. But you're not getting my question. Like, when you say nip in the bud, should he be allowed to go on the subway and talk to the guy next to him about perhaps joining his movement? Or should he be allowed to talk to people in restaurants? Or what should we do with the fascist who you believe is inspiring genocide?
So first of all, the alt-right is a neo-fascist movement, and they're trying to hide behind some softer versions of their more open counterparts who identify themselves as Nazis. But they're still part of the same movement, first of all. Second of all, when someone is trying to speak at a campus or at a rally, they're doing it not just because they have an opinion, but someone like Yiannopoulos or any other alt-righter or fascist or neo-fascist is doing it to recruit other people. No, we don't let them recruit. And in fact, when you look back at the Holocaust and the lessons that we draw from that, we don't say, oh, well, at least we let them voice their opinion. We say never again.
Okay,
well,
so,
again
and
is now, especially after Trump.
We elevate people like Dietrich Bonhoeffer or members of the plot against the leader of Nazi Germany to kill him. So, I mean, that was the response, of course, to the leader of that fascist movement. Most people think it was legitimate. Do you think, you're not answering my question, that people like Milo, who you've decided are fascists, should be allowed to speak in public? You said they weren't allowed to speak at Berkeley.
He should not be allowed to
speak
speak in public to spread his racist and misogynistic and homophobic lies. No, he does not have the right to do that.
What about
when he's using his speech to whip up attacks on people? No, he doesn't have the right to do that.
So
and to spread lies about our humanity? No, he doesn't.
Okay, so you're not allowed to say things that you think are untrue. Well, I mean, of course, in the case of Berkeley,
no,
he
that's
was
not what I said.
Okay.
I didn't say you're not allowed to say things that are untrue. But if you're trying to spread racism and hostility, misogyny, rape, whip up people to lynch people, or to certainly have that mentality to rape people or to lynch them, absolutely not. And any decent human being, whether it was in a classroom or at a restaurant, if they heard someone doing that, would turn around and tell them, you need to stop talking. You are not welcome here. This is not a safe environment. You need to go. Well, that's what we did at UC Berkeley, and that was a good thing.
Hit them or set fires. So you're a middle school teacher, which may surprise some of our students, or rather some of our viewers, that you have students. The First Amendment was always kind of the cornerstone of American civic life, the idea that you have the right to say something that other people may vehemently disagree with, but you have that right. It's enshrined in the Bill of Rights. Do you teach that to your students?
The First Amendment is about free speech, but that's not an abstraction. And if there was someone in my classroom who was espousing rape or genocide or attacks on Muslims, I would certainly make sure that I stood up for the rest of my students and told them they need to stop. And if they refused to, they would need to leave.
Would you hit them?
In fact, fascism isn't just about abstract. No, I'm not finished though yet, and I'm not finished yet. If there is a fascist in any situation that I was in, I would call for other people to take action too. But it's not just about the immediate moment.
Right,
it's also within the context of building a movement.
But I don't want this to be abstract.
There is a movement against Donald Trump
You're getting abstract.
and against fascism.
I want to bring this back to the concrete, as you said, and rightly so. So if there was a student in your class who started espousing what you believe is fascism, and you said you need to leave, you need to be quiet, you need to leave, and he didn't leave, would you hit him as you hit that protester? Would you beat him up?
No, of course not. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about people who, you know what? In Sacramento, there were fascists who had knives tied at the ends of sticks, and they stabbed people, including us.
Not the man that you hit. He looked kind of unarmed to me.
Oh, yes, actually, they did. And it's funny to you, but it's actually not funny to the rest of us. And that's why we take this really seriously.
I know that you take it seriously, and that's why I'm asking you a really simple question.
But I am serious as a heart. I am serious as a heartbeat,
too. I believe you. Oh, I believe that you're serious.
And we're not talking about a classroom. We're talking about people who are trying to kill and murder people and who've already done it. And who are trying to create a hostile environment on these campuses in order to do that. No, that's not a safe environment for immigrant students. That's not a safe environment for women or Muslim studits or trans students. And so, yeah, we have a right to defend ourselves and real free speech.
Let me ask you one last question, if I may. So if you're standing, I just want to know, like, the protocol for anti-fascist activists like yourself. You're standing on a street corner, someone starts saying something you don't like, and you think, boy, that's an act of hostility, that person's a fascist.
No, but you're misrepresenting the words that I've been saying. This isn't about not liking something. This isn't about Ben & Jerry's versus Stone Cold Pizza or something. This is about the lives of real people, immigrants who are under attack now, Muslims who are being massacred,
and I'm
women who are
asking
being raped.
How deep is your commitment?
So you're the one trivializing this, not me.
I'm not in any way trivializing, and I ask you a sincere question. To what extent would you go to stop that person from spreading genocidal propaganda?
I would call for people to counter-protest, to stand up, and to shut down any attempts to fascistly recruit and organize.
Like, what if I want to keep talking? I'm saying something that you find appalling, but you know what? I've got a First Amendment right. I'm an American. What would you do? So a bunch of people come and say, stop that. I say, no, I'm not going to stop that. I'm an American. What are you going to do next?
You know, the First Amendment, you want to talk about the First Amendment? Coretta Scott King's letter wasn't allowed to be read on the floor of the Senate last week under the Constitution in the Senate.
Well, that's exactly what happened.
And yet, at the same time, you're the one then who's actually trying to defend someone like a fascist speaking and recruiting at a college campus.
All right, Yvette,
I'm proud to say that we all stood up and we shut him down.
Speech rights. All right, thanks for coming on and showing us what you believe. Up next, teachers at a Virginia high school are posting naked political propaganda all over the school. Administrators are doing nothing about it. Of course, we'll ask a student who actually goes there to tell us what he's experienced and what happened when he complained. Stay tuned. Well, a poster is appearing all over at Yorktown High School in Arlington, Virginia. The poster reads this: Patriots know facts are not political. Diversity strengthens us. Science is real. Women's rights are human rights. Justice is for all. We are all immigrants. Kindness is everything. We are Yorktown. Well, the signs are still up. Joining us now is John Piper. He's a senior at Yorktown High School. John, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yorktown High School has in its bylaws essentially the pledge that students can expect an apolitical school environment. You saw this and recognized it for what it is, which is political propaganda. What'd you do next?
I tried to contact the school. I told my parents. I said, this is it looks like political propaganda.
Yeah.
And we contacted the school. We emailed the principal. We ended up getting referred to some of the teachers. We emailed back and forth with the teachers. And then we went higher to the school board and talked with our local radio station, WMAL. And from there, they contacted the superintendent, and they said they were going to take the signs down. And then That was over a weekend period, and on Monday the signs were still up, and we had gotten word that they had changed their minds and they were keeping the signs up.
So the idea is, I guess what bothers me so much about this story and why I'm so impressed by your response to it is it's the sneakiest kind of propaganda. Propaganda passing itself off as sort of obvious observations, as if people don't believe science. Are people in your school arguing that science is not real?
No.
So this is an attack on conservatives over evolution. That's what it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
And climate change. And
exactly.
Yeah.
So when you said this is politics, they said, no, it's not?
They said, that teachers responded that this was not political. This was policy. This was relevant and not apolitical. And it was ridiculous to me because it's obviously political. In such a heated political climate right now, this is very relevant.
So you took this to some local media, and at least one of them ran a headline saying conservative students at Yorktown are against diversity.
Yes. I know.
Was that the message you were bringing? We're against diversity?
Of course not. Of course not. I mean, I support women and I support minorities, and I mean, it's ridiculous to say that I don't. And it's crazy that someone would even bring that notion up.
So they're just saying that your teacher's point is basically these things are true. There's no debate about them. It's not political. The right to keep and bear arms is in the Constitution. Obviously, it's the Second Amendment to the Bill of Rights. If you were to post that, you think, on the wall, how would that go over?
I mean, there's a serious double standard here at play. Yeah. Conservative values would not be accepted on the walls of the school, especially not in the way they're doing them. They would see through that easily because it's majority liberal. I mean, there's no way you would be able to put conservative things like that on the wall.
Right.
It's absolutely ridiculous.
Quoting the Bill of Rights now being regarded as
the Constitution. I mean, you wouldn't be able to.
What's funny is you saw right through this, and you had the guts to confront them about it, and it didn't do any good, but it certainly says something good about you,
and,
I think.
A lot of students saw through it, and wouldn't speak up. And I talked to our teenage Republican group, and they said they didn't want to comment because they didn't want to start anything. And I thought that was ridiculous. Come on, I mean, you've got to say something when you see something wrong like this.
Amen. Amen. John Piper, Yorktown High School. Remember the name. I'm going to vote for you for Senate someday. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Up next, Piers Morgan tried to point out that Trump's inauguration order is not exactly a Muslim ban. And for his efforts, he got the middle finger, both from comedian Jim Jeffries and from author J.K. Rowling. Piers Morgan joins us after the break.
There is no Muslim ban. If there was...
off.
Sorry, why don't we... Okay. Okay. This is the point. This isn't talk about the hysteria. I'm talking about 85% of the world's Muslims are allowed into the country.
This is what you do, Piers. You say, he hasn't done this, he hasn't done that, he's not going to do all these things. Give him a chance, mate. And you know what I mean?
Why not?
Hitler didn't kill the Jews on the first day. He worked up to it.
Well, that was Piers Morgan debating President Trump's travel ban with Jim Jeffries, a comedian from Australia. It was all on Real Time with Bill Maher on HBO, but Piers was hardly done. After that, he got into a lengthy Twitter spat with Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling. Rowling tweeted this: the fact-free, amoral bigotry apologism of celebrity toady Piers Morgan is, of course, why it's so delicious to see him told to F off. Piers replied this way by calling Rowling's tweet, quote, peak foul-mouthed minor celebrity anti-Trump hysteria at its most deliciously supercilious. Rowling retorted this way: if you'd only read Harry Potter, you'd know the downside of sucking up to the biggest bully in the school is getting burned alive, and so on, for dozens of tweets. But when he isn't battling beloved children's authors on the internet, Piers Morgan is the U.S. editor-at-large for DailyMail.com. He joins us now from Tampa. Piers, that was when citizens of the British Commonwealth go to war with each other, the results are unbelievable. So what was the argument Jim Jeffries was making? F off. What does that mean exactly?
Well, look, it wasn't an argument, was it? He was just shutting me down by telling me to go forth and multiply. I mean, what was extraordinary was we just had a lengthy segment in the show, in Bill Maher's show, about the need for President Trump to be more factual, to always tell the truth, not to be erroneous with his facts and so on. And then we moved on to, I think Bill mentioned it first, the Muslim ban. And I said, well, hang on, it's not actually a Muslim ban. Now, I wrote a column for the Daily Mail when this executive order came out saying I didn't agree with it, I didn't think it was well executed, I thought it was wrong. However, you cannot call something a Muslim ban if 85% of the world's Muslims are allowed into America, even if it comes into effect. So it was just a factual statement. And it seemed to me very important to make that point and make it strongly, given we just had a big debate about facts. Anyway, Jim Jeffries didn't like this, and off he went, you know, effing and blinding and trying to shut me down. He didn't really have any argument to put to me. And then he used the Hitler analogy, and, you know, Hitler started, you know, didn't kill the Jews all on day one. I mean, to me, I'm sorry, but I just find this Hitler stuff with Donald Trump unbelievably offensive for two reasons. One, you know, Adolf Hitler killed 12 million people, including a systematic extermination of 6 million Jews in the Holocaust. This is not something we should be trivially throwing around about other people unless they have done similar acts. Donald Trump, to my knowledge, has not murdered anybody. All right, so this analogy of him being the new Hitler I find incredibly offensive. I also think it diminishes the scale and importance and horror of what Hitler did. So I think that should just be shut down. But, of course, you try and say this, and if you're not prepared now in the liberal world to say that he's the new Hitler, and you're not prepared to say every Muslim is banned from the country, you yourself then become the devil. And that's what happened to me.
Right, you're complicit in these crimes. So to J.K. Rowling, I'm interested. I want the overview here for a sec. Like a lot of people, especially of her station, affluent, well-known celebrities, she's really upset, like more upset than I've ever seen a class of people ever be upset. What is that about? Why are people you'd think would be in a pretty good mood because they're insulated from every economic variation you can imagine? Why are they so mad right now?
Well, she's a serial loser. I mean, the more that J.K. Rowling has screamed at people to vote in a certain way, the more her people have lost. So let's go through the checklist of glorious failure. She backed Ed Miliband in the last UK election. He got thumped by David Cameron. She then moved on to back the Remain campaign to stay in Europe. And obviously we Brexited, so she lost that as well. She then threw her substantial political influence behind Hillary Clinton, shouting down anybody that disagreed with her. And of course, Hillary got a drubbing as well from a guy who was a non-politician. So if you're J.K. Rowling, you're 3 for 3. You are the worst celebrity political pundit on the entire planet. So look, I understand her pain. But she is, I think, Tucker, synonymous with this sort of absurdly arrogant, supercilious kind of view of so many celebrities now on the left. And I'm, you know, as you know, I'm more liberal than I am right, but I cannot stand this anti-Trump hysteria, which is now infesting every part of the political debate. Donald Trump's been president for less than 1 month. He has not been remotely monstrous, not by any standards of a dictator. Let's all just take as I said on a gigantic chill pill, and let's just see how he plays out. I happen to be quite encouraged as somebody who probably wouldn't naturally have voted for Donald Trump myself, but I've watched his interaction with Japan and with China and with Canada today, with my own country, the UK. He looks to me to be somebody easing into the position of president and actually being quite pragmatic and pretty sensible. So why don't we all just stop marching every time he tweets, stop screaming every time he says anything, and just calm down?
I think that's great advice. Or if you're J.K. Rowling, just go to your wine cellar for a month or two. Calm down.
Just go and write about Hogwarts, wizards, whatever they are. I've never read a word of Harry Potter. Just go and immerse yourself in the world of muggles or whatever they are and shut up. Because, you know, if a celebrity wants to talk about a cause, so you're Leo DiCaprio and you want to talk about climate change in a sensible, intelligent way, you know, that's great. DiCaprio, after Trump won, the first thing he did, he went with Al Gore to see the new president to talk to him about climate change. That is a smart way for a celebrity to use his status. But to be somebody famous and just assume your view somehow is more important than everybody else's. And if somebody doesn't agree with that view, you must scream them down like they're the devil. I think it's pathetic.
I love it when Brits fight. Piers Morgan, thank you for that.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Coming up next, the Oroville Dam is on the brink of failure in California. We'll ask why this happened. They knew it was coming. How to get this far? Stay tuned. Thousands of people are fleeing their homes in California tonight thanks to fear that the Oroville Dam could fail at any minute. The problem is the dam's spillway, which is rapidly eroding thanks to overflow from the lake above it, Lake Oroville. If it does fail, a 30-foot wall of water could hit and obliterate multiple cities. We'll keep you updated on the situation there. Of course, it's worth asking at some point how the situation got this bad. Years ago, environmental groups warned about the dam's deficiencies. 4 years of drought dropped the lake to a fourth its normal volume, which could have made repairs pretty easy. But officials in California said the repairs weren't worth the expense. Perhaps setting aside billions for high-speed rail wasn't the smartest move. That's it for us tonight. Hannity up next. Have a great night.